You're listening to a podcast by Change My Relationship, featuring licensed marriage and family therapist and author Carla Downing. These podcasts are designed to provide you with practical solutions based on biblical truths for all your relationships. Today, Carla will be interviewing a guest who has experienced a relationship problem and successfully worked through it.
Welcome to Change My Relationship podcast. Today, I have with me two women who are in neurodiverse marriages, and they have brought this topic to me that they say is very common in a neurodiverse marriage, where the what we call neurotypical wife or the non-neurodiverse partner, the partner that does not have the neurodiversity, comes to them saying that she feels as though she is losing what she refers to as her sense of self. And we want to talk today how that happens. How do you lose your sense of self in a marriage to someone that is also has been referred to as having Asperger's syndrome? So today I want to welcome Kathleen and Elizabeth back because they have been here before, and it is actually the most listened to podcast by far of all of my podcasts. And Kathleen's husband, Cooper, has also been on by himself, and then the two of them together, if I'm remembering correctly. And those are also the most listened to podcasts. So this is a very, what I should say, popular or well-needed topic. So today I want to welcome again Elizabeth and Kathleen.
Thank you, Carla, for inviting us back to share with you. And today, Elizabeth and I want to spend some time speaking to the women who are married to men with autism spectrum disorder and what we'll be referring to as Aspergers. We're going to start by taking a few minutes to explain the difference between Aspergers and autism, and then we're going to go on to talk about the neurotypical wife's part of the marriage relationship, and that is her sense of self. So in 2013, the DSM-5 came out, and they removed Asperger's as a standalone diagnosis and umbrellaed it under autism spectrum disorder. We started to hear Aspies identify themselves as autistics. So we want to take a minute to explain. If a person was previously considered as having Asperger's, they still do. They are not autistic. Autistics have language development delays and tend to have intellectual delays. Aspies do not. ASD is an umbrella of 5 different diagnoses, which Asperger's is one. There's classic autism, and then there's Asperger's syndrome. And medical doctors, like your primary care physicians, they use ICD-10 codes, and Asperger's has its own code, F84.5. Autism has its own separate code. So under that umbrella, there's Rett's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So the example we want to share is, just because all of these are umbrellaed under autism spectrum disorder doesn't mean a person with Rett's disorder is now autistic, or that the Asperger man will have Rett's disorder. Some now refer to being high-functioning autism instead of Asperger's, or they'll refer to themselves as ASD. But for this podcast, our reference will be Asperger's.
Let me stop you just there for a second so that it doesn't get lost in the weeds. What we're trying to do is clear up the confusion of, is he autistic? Does he have Asperger's? And really, in reality, what matters to you is that you have a functional understanding of what is going on in your marriage. You had just said that some people refer to high functioning autism instead of Asperger's, but for us, we're going to use Asperger's.
Correct.
Now, define Asperger's for how we're going to be talking about it in this podcast and the next one.
Asperger's is a neurodevelopmental disorder that impacts the person's ability to be effective in their communication. That's expressive and receptive, and their ability to be effective in socialization, which we see play out in their relationships. A person with Asperger's has no language delays in development. They have a good vocabulary, their ability to construct sentences properly. They can even speak a foreign language fluently.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there. Before I was a marriage family therapist, I was a speech language pathologist. So I'm not going to assume that people understanding really the difference between expressive and receptive. Expressive means how you, yes, how you say things, how you get your thoughts out. Receptive is how you hear, which means how you comprehend, how you understand. And socialization is also referred to as pragmatic language development or language ability. Pragmatic meaning how you interpret the meaning of what the other person is saying, which can be from nonverbal communication, in other words, your body language, your tone in your voice, all the different things that the person is picking up, verbal and nonverbal, in order to figure out the meaning. For instance, we can say, "Oh, please get that for me," or you can say, "Please get that for me." What does that mean? The difference is, I've got irritation and anger. That's a different meaning than, "Oh, please get that for me." Or, "Well, so would you like to go with me?" Or, "Would you like to go with me?" That is more of and my body language at the same time, and the socialization cues, which have to do with like the standard of conversation. Like, how do we do this? Do we say one thing and then the next person comments and then we don't change subjects, or we do? All of that has to do with the pragmatic, or what you refer to as the socialization. So socialization is the pragmatic and the involvement, like in the conversation. Does that make sense, or did I just confuse it even worse?
No, okay. That's perfect.
Can you give us some practical examples of the communication that occurs in neurodiverse marriages?
Yes, I can do that. Not all Aspies experience what we're talking about, and not all neurotypicals experience what we talk about, but what we're discussing is what typically happens. My husband has an auditory processing. So this affects how he hears and how he expresses. He will hear maybe this word in the sentence and the last two words, and everything in between is gone, and he kind of sandwiches it up in the middle, and that's what he thinks he's hearing, which may not be what I'm expressing. So that's how he receives it. They also have a very literal meaning to words. And I'll give you an example. When we were first married, when he speaks, and I've heard other women talk about that, it's very quick, and it'll sound like a machine gun going off. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. And I was very upset one morning, and I said, "I've made an appointment with a pastor, and we're going to talk about this language problem, because it sounds like you've got a machine gun and you're just firing away bullets at me." And he says, "I can't do that appointment." And I said, "Why?" He says, "I don't own a machine gun." Now, you know what that does to the neurotypical wife's brain, because she's lost. That is a part of what they go through. They may also interpret our nonverbal cues, where we can pick up on something that seems obvious to us. It's a blank screen for them. Mm-hmm. The other part that we've discovered is that there's a disconnect. Their facial expression, their body language, and their tone of voice are all separate. There's not a cohesiveness to them. So we have a hard time reading them. They have a hard time reading us. They don't pick up on our cues. Wow. And this creates a problem in the relationship and the communication back and forth between the husband and wife.
Wow. So that would be incredibly confusing, frustrating, and I'm going to use the word exasperating, because it's literally like you're both speaking different languages, even though you're speaking
Yes.
the same language.
Yes.
And imagine doing that on a day-to-day situation where you're trying to have a relationship and just do life and talk about the kids or the marriage or what you need to do or how you need to pay the bills.
And I have experienced that. It wasn't that long ago when it was on a weekend, and I went into the bedroom to see if Cooper was still awake. And I walked in then just like, I said, honey, are you awake? And he turns around and he says, what? Now, this is another issue because they'll speak very bluntly and abruptly, and you just feel like you're hit between the heart, you know. And I said, I'm only asking if you're still awake. He goes, I said what? Translated means, when I say what to you, it means, yes, I'm awake. How would I know that?
You wouldn't, because what to you means I'm irritated and I want to know what you're trying to say to me. And like, yeah, that would be, again, that complete disconnect where you don't communicate what you need and what he needs and what he means and what you mean.
Right.
It's like you're in two, you know, that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Is that the right planets? You're on two different planets.
And I said that when we first had a podcast with you. I said, I understood that book, but this was a planet out there in the galaxy nobody had taught me about.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So that is a very, very frustrating situation to be in. And what about Elizabeth? Do you have some examples that you can think of practically that kind of popped into your mind as Kathleen was talking?
Well, I think one of the things that I was thinking about was if you're even sitting around with a group of people or even by yourself and between two people and you're doing, say that there's a joke that's very obvious that most people would understand and get, and they don't understand. Mm-hmm. They don't know that it's a joke. And so they may ask you privately later, like, can you explain to me what happened? Or you could see a delay in them, maybe seconds later, maybe minutes later, half an hour, where they need either they finally grasp it or they need you to explain to them about the joke.
Well, and then so also that makes socialization and relationships outside the marriage really difficult, it sounds like.
Yes.
There's a considerable mismatch with this marriage. And I'm just going to briefly explain that in the research that Cooper and I have done, what we've been taught in therapy is that you can take a neurotypical and a neurotypical in a marriage. And yeah, they'll have some hindrances and obstacles, but they most likely can find a way through. You can put a neurodiverse with a neurodiverse. They get along fine. No expectation problems. But you put that neurotypical with the neurodiverse, and unfortunately, it's the highest rate divorce. There is such an extreme mismatch in this relationship.
Yes. I think I've heard people even say that therapists have kind of said to them, you're going to get divorced. Do you really want to even bother to do therapy? Which sounds very, very negative, but maybe it's reflecting what is an incredibly high rate of marriages not working out. Although there is much more understanding and attention to it now. So I think that hopefully that's beginning to switch a little when there's some practical help for people that are struggling in these marriages. So let's break and go over to something that's referred to as dual diagnosis. Dual diagnosis means that they have multiple diagnoses from the DSM. And can you answer that?
Yes, it's not uncommon for them to have Asperger's and ADHD or OCD or trauma. Or like with Cooper, there's literally like a tri-diagnosis. We started off with Asperger's, and then his therapist said, I am changing the primary to trauma, secondary Asperger's, third is ADHD without the hyperactivity. So you're not dealing with just the Asperger traits. It's the other co-occurring diagnoses that come in and complicate. Asperger's can complicate the OCD, or the trauma can complicate the Asperger's, and everything in between. But there's also the secure attachments, and this is another thing we're just learning about, where there could be high avoidance or insecure with the Aspie man, or disorganized attachment. And even another area we've grown into is the consideration of biochemistry and hormones. And that is because an Aspie man have their high dopamine, they have high dopamine imbalances. And this is the hormone that causes them to have the looking for that feel-good experience reward. Mm-hmm. But now,
So I'll stop there for a second and interject. So it is very, very common for men with Asperger's to also have, say, a sexual addiction or an alcohol addiction.
Yes.
Or
yes,
you just said, like
the gaming,
video gaming,
video gaming, where they're looking for that high dopamine experience
reward.
Yes. So now we're talking about an even more complicated marriage. Exactly. And then you have on here the alexithymia, which, can you explain that?
Well, alexithymia is their inability to be able to identify, understand, and express or describe their emotions. They're not only not understanding yours, they don't often understand their own. And that plays into it. So see, now you start to understand why the neurotypical woman is frustrated. But we tend to just look at Asperger's and we check off those little boxes and traits and go, okay, let's go forward from here. Not understanding that there's all these additional complications that make it even more challenging. So like with all of these attributes coming into play, we start to see the significant mismatch in the marriage. Mm-hmm. And this creates vulnerability in the neurotypical wife's sense of self.
Yes. So
she wants that oxytocin. She wants that connection. She wants that cuddle me. And he's like, no, I'm over here with dopamine.
I'm over here with dopamine. So you're putting it down to the bottom level. I need dopamine. I need oxytocin.
Yeah.
So there.
God help you both. Yeah.
And so if somebody's listening and they're not in a neurodiverse marriage, they've got a very good idea of how incredibly complicated one is. For the women that are in, and we're saying women only because it is commonly the women that are seeking out the information and the help. Is there a difference in the statistics of men with Asperger's to where there are more women that are married to Asperger men versus men that are married to Asperger's women? I think the statistics show that boys is it like 4-to-1 or 2-to-1? How is the statistics at this point?
I don't have that statistic for you, unfortunately, but it's well known that because it's 80% to 90% now inherited, typically coming through the father's bloodline, although it could come through the mother's. My husband's parents were like that, came through mother more than father. So that's why there is more men out there on the spectrum than there are women. The other part that complicates that is that a woman who has autism spectrum disorder, she can mask it better. She's better at masking it and handling it more than the men. Going back to the fact that he has the anxiety from it, he's higher anxiety. That's why he searches out more dopamine. It just keeps cycling itself.
Mm-hmm. So we're not saying that there can't be a man that's married to a woman with ASD and that he himself would also be frustrated with some of these things. But we're saying that for you two, we have to say that you are both involved in the private Facebook group, My Aspie and Me.
Right.
And so the most of the participants in that group are women. So, and you two are women in an Asperger's marriage. So we're using the example of what you're hearing and what's coming to you. So we're not saying that it can't be a man, but I think for the simplicity in this podcast, we're going to talk about the woman and how the woman loses her
Right.
sense of self
Right.
and go from there. So we don't have to keep going back and explaining it. So can you define a sense of self?
Yes, it's the image that you have of yourself and how you perceive your identity and understand your purpose in life. It's faith in your self-worth, even when you're criticized. It's confidence in your ability to bounce back, which is your resilience when things go amiss. It's being authentic, which allows you to be open to change and adapt, which is so necessary in a neurodiverse relationship. If necessary, being willing to stand on something that's important to you. It's being able to trust your abilities and trust your judgment, to set goals and attain them. And it's the very core essence of who God created you to be. It is your mindset and heart set of knowing and feeling how special you are. And then holding on to your sense of self in the midst of a neurodiverse relationship dynamic is challenging, but it is so absolutely necessary. When a woman is in a relationship or married to an Asperger man, like you had said, Carl, at the beginning, we often hear that I've lost that sense of myself. I have been there. Elizabeth has talked about it. We've talked about it together. Or they'll say, I feel like I've lost a part of myself. Or they'll go, I don't know who I am anymore. So much of my focus has been on this marriage and him. I don't know where I'm at.
So the question that I have is, when you're dating, and this is probably a question that a lot of us ask, even if we're in any difficult or dysfunctional marriage, but why wouldn't you notice all this before, when you were dating, before you get married?
Because the NT wife is not aware of the man's neurodivergence and all that is involved in how this plays out. It starts with, time was not taken to consider if our values, beliefs, expectations align up. Red flags are ignored as they are thought of as cute little quirks, but think the man's good points outweigh the quirks. Love will cover them all. The wife thinks that she can change his quirks. She may subconsciously see what she wants in a partner. She has a preconceived template that is projecting her ideal marriage over what realistically is. But then this creates an ignoring of the true evidence of Asperger traits. So after the honeymoon, life starts to calm down and the day in and day out living kicks in. The Asperger man feels safe with his neurotypical wife, and so he removes his mask. He returns to his authentic self. He no longer sees the need to continue pursuing. He came, he hunted, he conquered, won her heart. Now life returns to the status quo for him. Whereas the neurotypical wife has a continued desire to be pursued, because it affirms that they are loved, but the pursuing may start to decrease. So what happens 6 months to a year after the wedding or sooner with your Asperger and you? The love hormones calm down. There is a return to the attachment style of which you grew up. The degree of relationship and communication he once exhibited during dating courtship takes a toll on him. And if the NT wife presses him for more, his anxiety increases, and it can easily turn into a meltdown. He may become verbally offensive towards his neurotypical wife. The neurotypical wife now becomes the pursuer. She has needs that our Asperger is no longer meeting. And if he met them before being married, then she thinks he is capable afterwards. He was masking, but this causes him increased anxiety. Aspies tend to need spans of time for solitude to counterbalance the high anxiety they experience on an ongoing basis.
So I'm wondering here, what is their anxiety from? Why would they have high anxiety? Is it just the difficulties they have with interacting in relationships that causes them to have the anxiety? Where does the anxiety come from?
They're typically born with it. And this is what from birth, it starts in. And then when they start growing up, like when they're forming friendships and stuff, they start to notice that there's something different.
Right.
And they don't quite fit in. Parents may not understand them. They don't know how to let the parent know their need. And it just keeps accumulating. They kind of bump along in school, but that's a hit and a miss. In relationships growing up, junior high, high school, college, or whatever, it's a hit and miss. They become comfortable with themselves because they have found ways there again to reward themselves, to get that quick fix. But that anxiety is always there, and it exhausts them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the Asperger husband is struggling too. So I mean, this is not only hard for the wife, this is hard for him to try to do a relationship with, first of all, we know the differences between men and women anyway, but but to try to do a marriage relationship is hard for him.
And there's something that's come into play that they're talking about now through research, and that's the double empathy theory, where the wife feels like you just cannot empathize and understand me. The men are starting to speak up and say, but you're not empathizing with my condition, my disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think it helps her to look at it that way because it gives her a little bit of compassion amidst that frustration and aggravation that she's feeling, and maybe even anger and resentment, by recognizing, hey, this is hard for him too.
What's interesting is that's a pivotal moment in the relationship. And I remember it. We've been married going on 24 years. It was only 4 years ago that it finally clicked. And I thought, I now know what you're going through. And it just made a complete U-turn in my heart. We just had a woman in the group explain this not long ago. She goes, for so many years, we've been going through, but she goes, working with that neurodiverse therapist, finally she got to understand what he's going through. It made a complete turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to the wife at this point, which we're in now? I think we're in the part of the marriage where she's beginning to get frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Her increased pursuing has become her mission to work harder and to make the marriage work. Because if she can make the marriage work to fix that which is no longer, then she will be happy. It will be more fulfilling. She will have relationship connection, and she will feel validated. There's not one thing wrong with her desire to have a relationship with her husband. These are reasonable expectations. However, the neurodiverse husband's expectations differ.
Okay, can you just talk briefly about a couple of those expectations, how they differ?
Mm-hmm. The ASD husband may not think that marrying someone comes with responsibilities, defining what is an expected way at connecting, managing finances, and trust. They often view it as agreeing to literal aspects of sex, shared living, and paying more bills. So they may not feel the role of husband. They may just act it out. And we understand that your intention is to help your ASD husband, but he may or may not be open to learning about Asperger syndrome disorder. And if the marriage relationship is already at a stressful point, this could possibly make it more so. Your husband may need to hear this from a third party or someone outside of you. This may make him retreat into his foxhole and or become more avoidant towards you. So at this point, the neurotypical wife may start to get her husband to read articles, watch YouTubes, teach him about Asperger's, neurodivergence, and kind of become an analyst and a therapist. Her sense of purpose may become involved in making sacrifices of herself to satisfy her partner's needs. She is not able to balance the demands of her time and energy to take care of matters he does not. She may start to show symptoms of codependency. And this is interesting because some neurotypical wives may come from a family of origin where she has learned to be codependent. As a neurotypical wife, we may automatically, without realizing it, take hold of all the responsibilities and feel like we can handle it all because our Asperger husbands cannot, and end up completely emotionally and physically exhausted. We may have learned this behavior in our childhood and not be aware of it because it fits like a glove, and or we may feel our ASD husband can't handle anything else outside of his realm. So we take charge by handling the situations, which makes us feel more in control. Or the neurotypical wife may be coming from a family of origin of childhood neglect, where there were unattached caregivers. She may have been invisible to her family. She was not seen or heard, and her needs were basically unmet. She may have a life history of experiences that have gone missing. She may be entering the marriage without a sense of self and see this man who is masking well as an answer to her prayers. Some neurotypical wives do not enter into the marriage as codependent, but in being in an Asperger's relationship, she becomes codependent. As neurotypical wives, we may not be aware of not having a sense of self and or codependency until we wake up one day and do not know who we are anymore. We are juggling so much in the marriage that we are at a breaking point with everyone looking to us for everything. We may have liked this in the beginning of the relationship, but now it feels like we can't go on doing this forever, and we don't have our neurodiverse husband to turn to for support and help. The result is teaching the Aspie husband learned helplessness.
So that was a lot. So let me just backtrack a little bit and say we threw in the word codependency there. In our second podcast that's going to be in this two-part series, we are going to delve even more into whether you came into the marriage with codependency or you became codependent in the marriage. But for the purpose of this conversation at this point, I'm just going to say that codependency is where you don't have a sense of self and you derive your sense of self from your interaction or the other person with the other person. So it's like your focus on the Asperger's husband is where you're getting your sense of self instead of you with it from within you and who you are. So as we've just described, the progression of this marriage, where you come in there, you're thinking, oh, I found my man. I'm going to have a lovely life. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to be ever so happy. Maybe you even thought this was Prince Charming and you were riding away on the white horse. And then all of a sudden, shock of all shocks, he appears to be somebody different after you're married. And that gets worse and worse and worse to where now you're a basket of hurt and resentment and misunderstanding, and you can't resolve this with him. And on top of that, you don't even know who you are anymore. Your needs haven't been met. Now you decide, okay, the only way I can make this better is to fix him, is to change him, is to get him to see what the problem is. So you can come at that, and we're going to talk about that next time too, with being intense, with lecturing, with changing, with trying to force him to see the difference by having all the things that I talk about we do in our non-Asperger's marriages, where we have a guy who's got problems. And maybe he's narcissistic or narcissistic traits, or he's got an addiction or whatever. These are the same things that we do. But you've gotten to this point in an Asperger's marriage because, as we're talking about, you're on those completely different planets. and you get desperate to try to get him to understand what is wrong and what he needs to change. And he can't get it because he's on a different planet, right? So, okay, can each of you take a minute or two or three and explain how you felt that you either developed codependency, or if you had it before you were married, how it got worse in your marriage to an Asperger's man? And Kathleen, can you go first?
Yes. For me, it was during the marriage, because I was single for almost a decade before I met Cooper. And I was fine. I had a very lowly life. I was a single woman, was a part of groups. You know, I had my own friends. I had my own lifestyle. But Prince Charming came. The white horse never showed up. But I'm a firstborn A-type personality, and I'm a doer, I'm a manager, the organizer, and I'm a multitasker. So as I recognized Cooper's lesser strengths, I naturally took over and filled in the gaps. However, over time, I became angry and frustrated and resentful. But then I felt guilty, because aren't we supposed to be helpmates? There was so much to juggle and manage that I became more anxious. I became exhausted and started to doubt myself, because no matter how much I was investing myself in this marriage, Cooper wasn't changing and becoming a neurotypical husband. And that's a cue. That's a red flag. We're looking for neurotypicalness. We're not taking in the Aspergers. But for many years, we don't know that they're an Asperger. So as I kept doing all of the work and pursuing this pace, what our therapist was pointing out to me was that I was teaching Cooper learned helplessness, just as Elizabeth shared. I was teaching my husband that I can do it all, that I would do it all. However, in reality, I didn't want to do it all.
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Elizabeth?
Well, I believe that I had codependency. I learned that in my childhood, although I didn't know what it was called or what the name was. But then I met this man and started dating him. And as I'm going to talk about, it just fit so well. I didn't even recognize I was just carrying on what I had learned in my childhood until much later. So I noticed in our dating relationship and then early into our marriage how I had taken on the role of homemaker and caretaker. I had done this growing up in my childhood home from a very young age of 8, because both of my parents were unreliable. My mother-in-law was a homemaker, and this imprinted into my husband's neurodiverse logical brain. Looking back now, I feel, although I didn't realize it at the time, that this fit like a glove for both of us. For my husband, this was chores he didn't have to do anymore. And for me, this fulfilled my caretaking box. Years later, after taking your classes and getting emotionally healthy, I was able to realize that being codependent, relationship dependent was unhealthy. And I was looking for others or other things to fulfill the voids that I had in my life.
So when we talk about this idea of losing your sense of self, or what is also referred to as codependency, what traits would that neurotypical wife be displaying in this Aspie marriage? And if you can, if an example that you can think of for yourself pops up, please feel free to share that. So what are some of the things that you would be doing?
Some of the things that I did myself, and we hear this from other women too, is that you start to plead and beg him to adjust his behaviors and for his cooperation with you. And I mean, it literally is a pleading and a begging.
Literally.
Literally. She spends a lot of time thinking about how to influence and convince him about his needs to change so that he can become more neurotypical. And she needs him to acknowledge how his behavior is real and how it's affecting her. And I would do that. I would spend countless hours thinking, okay, or even literally drawing him pictures. Do you see when you behave like this?
Pictures? You drew pictures?
Literally would draw pictures. This is the impact it has on me. And you're met with that blank face because he's not understanding this. And so you say, okay, when you do this, I would do this. When you're at work and your medical assistant does A, B, and C, how does that make you feel? Oh, he goes, awful. And like, well, that's how I feel when you don't do A, B, and C, and yet cannot translate that.
No, that example doesn't register.
It does not transfer over.
Wow.
Okay, so what happens, though, that I would like the women to know, as she's doing all of the above, she's doing this at the expense of herself, because the result of her choices to pursue is that she risks that her husband may interpret her behaviors as unrealistic and unreasonable expectations. My husband told me that. You need to go get help because what you're asking of me is unrealistic. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I will go get help because I really don't know how to communicate with you. And hopefully maybe she'll get you in here or he'll get you in here, and that can be a start. He may also see these as demands.
Oh, and then
Yes.
that will be resented.
And that, please, ladies that are listening, the more you pursue him with this, he's going to see it as a demand. And then he reacts with avoidance and resistance and pulls away. Now, if he does have an avoidant attachment style, this is only going to emphasize it.
Yeah.
Now we're learning that there's a whole different way to communicate with these men. Rather than saying, I need this, or you have to do this, you need to be able to approach it by giving them a free will choice. Would you be willing? What do you think about us? And then leave it blank. They have to come around to this on their own. We can't pursue it and cause them to make it happen. So now, with all of the avoidance and pulling away, the anti-wife starts to feel like she's a failure.
Wow, that would be the point of despair, it sounds like. Like, this is just not working. I've lost it. And this is common in any difficult, dysfunctional relationship, like even with alcoholism. Al-Anon talks about you feeling like you feel guilty because you haven't been able to fix it. And you're angry at what's going on, but you're also fearful about what's happening. But yeah, so you're feeling really bad about yourself because I can't fix this. I don't know what else to do. You're taking on too much responsibility. It's not working. And then you're in despair and you're exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true.
Yeah. She overfunctions in most all areas of parenting, and this spills over into the practical management of the household. She comes to realize he may pretty much be an absent parent. She experiences feeling like a single parent, even though she is married, and then she becomes emotionally and physically exhausted. Many Aspie dads do not relate to their childhood and baby years. When the children become 8 years and older, they can have a conversation back and forth. The Aspie dad is able to relate and reciprocate with them.
So you're saying that this is also difficult parenting.
Very difficult parenting. You pretty much are going to be doing most of, if not all, management for the children. School,
okay,
projects, everything.
And if he does get involved, I'm only imagining when we're talking about the literal interpretation and children, you've got to have some like compassion and awareness of a child's immaturity and a child's emotions and a child's inability to express themselves perfectly, and that you need to dumb down your conversation and your instruction to that child's age level and put it in ways so it just sounds like another like very difficult dynamic can be going on, which I know for me, the most hurtful part of my dysfunctional marriage was when it affected my children, and my children were the brunt of any type of like fallout, or they were the brunt of frustration, or I mistreated them and overreacted with them and got impatient or angry, or my husband did or did something that I felt was hurtful to them, and then I'd get involved. So, and it was one heck of a big mess. So does that also happen?
It sure does. Yes, it sure does. There are some neurodiverse men that can show emotions. So we don't want to say that they're all emotionless. That's not true. It's just going to look very differently. But for the most part, if you're going to ask your children to do a project, a school project with your husband, for instance, that's not going to play into the emotional part of it. It's going to play into the logical part of their brain. And so you need to be careful with that. You need to maybe break it up into small chunks of time, depending upon the age of your child, to do something like that, because it could become very overwhelming, because they will naturally just take over the project.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all consuming for the child because the time span is too long, and then they're not understanding the process of the project. Okay. Because it's their logical brain. It's over what the child can comprehend as far as doing a project.
What about disciplining with the children? What happens with disciplining is I can imagine that maybe he's very like rigid and very rule based, and there's no like no wiggle room for how the child was feeling or what was going on or what contributed to that, and so the discipline maybe is too harsh.
Yes, that can happen. Yes, that can definitely happen, because that, once again, that plays in. It depends on where their rigidity is and how high that is. Yes. And or this could look like also too, if you're going to sit down and have a meeting with your child about something that you need to talk about, let's say your husband and you and the child, there's a lot of talking. And once again, it's the logical talking. It's above their brain level, and it can be, well, in my house, it was very long.
Oh, like lectures. I have a really good example that just popped into my mind of how this could happen. I was told a situation recently where a wife said that her neurodiverse husband was trying to put their elementary school child to bed, and the child was not going to bed quickly, and the dad was getting frustrated. And the child was frustrated. The dad was getting a little bit more like, just go to bed, just go to bed. And the child was obviously in touch with his sense of loss of not having this dad that felt really affectionate. And the little boy said, I need a dad. I need a dad. And that was a cry for love and attention. And the dad just missed it, and he said, I need a son that goes to bed. And now you think, ooh, how mean and how like wrong, but he's thinking, get the kid to bed quickly, that's my task. And he's not able to switch into that this little boy just had a cry for love and is talking about something emotional, an emotional need. And yet that just added wounding. Now the mom or the wife is sitting over here, hears that, and her heart breaks for that little boy, because this isn't the first time that little boy has suffered that kind of hurt and wounding. And yet, what can she do?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I had things that happened for a different reason, but that were like that I would go in there and try to convince my husband of where he was wrong and what he needed to do and how he needed to change. And it just intensified the resistance and the made it to where I was trying to tell him what to do, and he got more defensive, and like I said, that triangulation just gets worse and worse. So this is, I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast just talking about that. Yes, Kathleen?
This speaks to that black and white thinking, that neurology that they have, black and white. And I know we don't have children, we have grandchildren, but we didn't have children between us. But even years ago, with a medical assistant that Cooper had, she had done something against his wishes, and his response was, I'm going to have to punish her tomorrow. And I thought, this is a grown woman, you can't punish her. I mean, there's like, he didn't understand the art of discipline, that you have to talk to them and work this through. It's black and white.
Yeah, that could be very problematic, not only in the home, but in the workplace, obviously. So I think when we're talking about this, then we're really talking about almost like, then you feel like you've got to be this buffer between him and your children, or maybe even your friends and extended family. And that can even get into you what you call enabling or covering up or excusing his behavior and feeling like you need to interject yourself, which is all part of codependency that we do. That's even more. And you lose yourself even more when you have to do that. So how does this affect her? How does it affect her mood? How does it affect her life?
Well, when the questions come, and they will, it is important that a wife explain to their children in their own age-appropriate understanding what they are experiencing. It is not that their dad doesn't love them or is ignoring them intentionally, but as the mom, you need to explain to them their dad's brain and how it operates differently.
So how does this affect the wife? Because at this point, I'm feeling overwhelmed just even talking about it, and she's living it.
It is overwhelming. And we hear this from women, that they may start to find that their mood, that her husband's moods will impact their moods. For example, if he's having a good day and things have gone well at work, he's in a good mood, well, then she's going to be in a good mood as well. But if he's come home and things didn't go well, or things are not going well for him, her emotional mental world will crumble with him. And she may try to avoid preventing conflict for fear with him, for him shutting down or having a meltdown or being shut out. And then she may develop what is called walking on eggshells. And I experienced this more when I pressed in for Cooper to become a more neurotypical husband, to understand and empathize with what I was going through. It came off as me blaming him, making demands, and that's when his meltdowns and horrible behavior came to the forefront. And I hear this too. Well, what do I do when he starts calling me all of these bad names? Elizabeth and I talked about this. When they start to feel pressed in, when that husband feels like we're pressing in with him, they can take that up to a point, and then their brain cannot consume anymore. And that meltdown will happen. And when that meltdown happens, they've lost control. And that verbiage that comes out is horrendous.
Well, and that's when they're in the lower brain, because all of us, when we get overwhelmed and we're like, we become what's called emotionally dysregulated.
Right.
And then we get completely in emotions. We can't use our higher brain to be logical and to reason and problem solve. And then that's where you get angry. Some people could throw things. Some people can, you lose, say, like you said, it's a complete meltdown emotionally. And that doesn't just happen in Asperger marriages. It happens in any marriage. That's even when children are throwing a fit and screaming and flipping out, like that's all their lower brain emotions, and you're completely dysregulated. And the meltdowns can be really bad, I know.
Really bad, and it comes off sounding and feeling so abusive. And what we consult the woman, we go like, don't stay there and listen to it. Leave the room, because he will stop. And what they don't realize is that he feels such shame for doing it. He can't stop in the middle of it and reset himself. But you walk away and give him time. He will reset. And he didn't want to talk about it. He may not apologize for it. And honestly, I've gotten to that point when that happened. When I realized that I didn't even expect an apology. I'm like, okay, I know that I pressed too far. And I'm not saying that I was at fault, but this is part of that learning process in a neurodiverse marriage. With that, the woman needs to learn how to set firm boundaries. But here again, in sharing with them to do that, some women feel that that's being unfair and controlling of the husband. And then she may feel it's a harsh behavior towards him. And then she may feel guilty. But she's caught between her angst and what she's going through, and some boundary needs to be set. So in codependency, there may come the result of the Asperger's underdeveloped social skills and or lack of effective expressive empathy. And then she may become his spokesperson. And we find this is interesting too, especially with our Christian women. And they'll say, well, he doesn't like to go to church and he's not showing up to the Bible studies. And people are asking where he's at. What am I supposed to say? Mm-hmm. And I get that, but it's not her place to say. And even with different situations, people have said that about Cooper, or even some family members will say, well, why is he doing this? What's he doing? Isn't that odd? And I'm like, well, have a little chat with him. Because I can't speak for him. That's not my place to put words in his mouth. That's his to work out with friends and family.
I've had, not in a neurodiverse marriage, but just in a normal marriage, one woman gave me this example, said, well, when somebody asks something to get some information, like, where is your husband or why isn't he here? She just responds with, yeah, you're right. He's not here.
No, he's not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is he okay? He's fine. Well, why isn't he here?
Yeah, because he doesn't come. He's not here.
Yeah. Next time you see him, ask him. And you don't have to carry that for them.
Right. That's what we're trying to say.
But she may cover up his social faux pas, and because they are embarrassing to her, and make excuses for him. And I get that. I get that embarrassment feeling. But on the other hand, it's not my embarrassment. Mm-mm. You can walk away and let him walk that consequence out himself. Sometimes it works. And then if it doesn't, there's still not an area that you can control, or should you be controlling it for them? Many times the neurotypical wife takes on the responsibility of finding help for him. And the Asperger man typically does not see the need to go get help or to change. He's an adult man. He's come this far in life. He's well content with life is for him, and he doesn't see that need to change. But she needs the relationship to be fixed to improve the Asperger husband's ability to socialize and have relationship skills. So he is here to, and here we back it around again, to validate her, to bring her completion to her life, and to take care of and meet her emotional, physical needs, so she does not feel abandonment and does not feel alone. And this has much to do with, and according to how our culture has taught us on how marriage and relationship is to be. And I just want to share with the women that we are not to be two half people that marry to become a whole person. We're to be two whole people to complement one another, to be joined together, not to complete one another. And Carla, there's something significant that you share with us wives in a relationship, and that time needs to be given for the husband to be a he. Time needs to be taken for us wives to be a me. And then there's times for us to be a we. And that formula will work well in an Asperger neurodiverse relationship. The NT wife may also become emotionally unhinged, and some resort to profound tears. And some say this is the only way they can get their husband to take them seriously. Now, I've tried that myself. But in the long run, this isn't a viable solution. And here's another aspect that we want you ladies to consider. Even though you may get your Aspie husband to respond when you implement these escalated behaviors, what you're teaching him is that he only needs to do so when you escalate. And this is going to take a toll on you emotionally, mentally, and physically. Severe stress can disrupt the body's natural cortisol levels, which regulate the immune system. Impaired cortisol regulation can lead to autoimmune diseases. There are numerous women in groups that Elizabeth and I have been in, and even our own group, and even our own experience, where you go to that doctor and that doctor says, well, you've developed an autoimmune disorder. What's going on in your life?
Yes.
We cannot keep escalating at that level.
No, the stress of that. And this is common because women carry basically a tendency genetically, they can, to develop autoimmune disorders, but it doesn't happen if it's not triggered by environmental things. So environmental things can be a really stressful marriage.
I had read a while back, prior to my even developing it, and it said that a reason a lot of neurotypical women develop autoimmune disorders is their unwillingness to accept that he has a neurological disorder.
Well, they don't even know it at that point
No.
when they're going through all of that stress, and it's
And even when they find it out, they still think they can change this and fix it.
yeah, it's very hard. It's common in all dysfunctional relationships that women develop autoimmune disorders
Right.
because of the stress in the marriage, which that even makes a stronger argument for needing to learn how to handle this differently. So I'm imagining when all this is going on and you're trying to push him really hard and you're trying to get him to see the problem and you're having all of these different things that you're doing. What is he actually doing? Like if he's not melting down, what other responses can he have to your attempts to try to change him?
Well, what will often happen is the Aspie husband responds with a blank look on his face and withdraws even more from her. He may retreat into his foxhole. He will turn to his special interest because this all helps him reset the anxiety he experiences from the escalated emotions, his wife's and his.
So I imagine at this point that any wife listening will be feeling pretty overwhelmed right now, even though she at the same time might be feeling relief that, hey, somebody's talking about what I actually go through. As we go to the end of this first part, would you please give them some encouragement?
We want to share our understanding and empathy with you. We too have experienced what you have or may be going through. We encourage you to give yourself compassion and grace because your heart's intention is to improve the challenging relationship you have with your Aspie husband and partner. Our question today to our neurotypical women wives listening to this podcast is, do we need to work harder or wiser? Yes, relationship marriage takes work. However, not at the expense of waking up one day, looking in the mirror and not recognizing who we are. You can't change your husband. We are not called to or responsible to change our husband, neurotypical or Aspie.
If the neurotypical wife continues to work harder on changing her Aspie spouse, she does so at the risk of losing herself.
Okay, so we are going to stop here and we are going to continue with a second interview in which we will talk about how you restore the sense of self that you've lost in your Aspie marriage. So Kathleen, Elizabeth, thank you so very much for coming today and for sharing your, what we call in 12-step programs, experience, strength, and hope for women that are married to Aspie husbands.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast on Change My Relationship. I hope that if you are enjoying these podcasts, that you are sharing them with other people that you know would benefit from them, especially if you know somebody today who is in an Aspie marriage. If you would please forward this to them, you would be giving them a huge gift. So we welcome you back to further podcasts, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to Change My Relationship. We hope you will subscribe to these podcasts and share them with your friends. Carla would love to hear from you. She welcomes ideas for future podcasts as well as your feedback on how the podcast have helped your life and relationships. You can email her at carla@changemyrelationship.com. For more information on Change My Relationship and Carla Downing's ministry, including her books, studies, devotionals, podcast, and YouTube videos, visit changemyrelationship.com.